Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for the Big Gay Read presents a discussion on mental health in coming of age. Now, you might be wondering, what is this Big Gay Read business? And let me take some time to talk a little bit about that. Here at the library, we are committed to creating opportunities for the community to engage with queer issues through reading. So we thought to ourselves, what if we made a little book club? A little book club that we're calling The Big Gay Read. So the first book that we selected is called Aristotle and Dante, Discover the Secrets of the Universe by Benjamine Alire Saenz. Now, if you have not read this book, this event is still for you. We'll be discussing certain topics, things that come up in the book through the lens of mental health today. If you have read the book, that's wonderful as well. You'll be able to make those connections between the book and what we discuss. But I just want to reiterate, if you have yet to read the book, you don't plan to read the book, what we're discussing today will be pertinent to what's going on in the world and hopefully your everyday life as well. So yes, with that being said, I'm very excited to be here today with Dr. Jennifer Tang, a licensed clinical psychologist, as well as Scott Kennedy, who is a licensed social worker. Both of y'all practicing mental health therapists at Everwell Health and Counseling Services, which is a therapy practice based here in Ann Arbor. And I understand that you provide service through telehealth, which is wonderful, providing counseling that is diversity affirming and culturally responsive. Now that's doubly important today as it pertains to the book we're discussing. So I'm so glad that you guys are here today. How are you?
Doing great. Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. It's very humbling.
Yeah, I'm also doing well. Thanks.
You're very welcome. It's exciting stuff. Now I think it's a good idea to start here. Can I ask you, what is mental health?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think to lay the foundation to this conversation, and the way we kind of see mental health, it really is about kind of our mental, our emotional, our psychological, even our social well-being, and it's something that can shape everything from, how we go about and see the world, or how we interact with others, how we make decisions, things like that. And it's shaped by both how we think, feel, and act. I think I wanted to add, like, sometimes when we think about mental health, sometimes we think about like serious mental illness, like psychosis or, feeling suicidal, severe depression, that kind of thing. And really, I think I want to preface like this kind of conversation is about mental well-being, seeing mental health as an overall kind of mental and emotional well-being. It's something that is part of all of us.
Wow.
Yeah. And if I can lend just a little bit extra there, I think it's also important, right, to see all the factors that can play into mental health, right? I think the one we often think of is on the sort of the personal level, right? Your disposition, your self-talk, your perspective, how you view the world, expectations you hold for yourself, rigid thinking or flexible thinking, that type of thing. But it can also, your mental health can be impacted by larger factors like your family setting, school setting, your neighborhood or your work, or even on a larger scale, the beliefs of your community, the social services available to you, the laws, customs, and traditions of where you live. And on top of that, also, traumatic factors like intergenerational and historical traumas as well. So it really can be complex and bigger than we often think about, of just what's going on in my own head.
Wow. And we'll be getting into a lot of that today. And I'm excited to get into it. I'm also eager to know a little bit, when we're talking about mental health, when we're talking about our mental well-being, what can we do to help our mental health?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I feel like that's something, I guess with any of the things that we'll probably talk about today, we can kind of talk for hours probably on it. So probably our answers will be think about it as like a little tasting menu. But absolutely, I think in terms of like what can help bolster and foster our mental health, really is a kind of like a sense of feeling connected, feeling understood, feeling supported, being able to be our authentic selves, which I think will play out in some of the conversation we'll have today, but being able to be truly you and feeling accepted for who you are can really kind of help bolster our mental well-being. And I guess to even add to that too, in thinking about relationships, sometimes it's okay to kind of remove relationships out of our lives if we aren't feeling supported, that we aren't feeling understood. So oftentimes I think it's the whole Facebook culture, right? We collect friends. I've met that person, we were friends in 4th grade, they're my friend, but maybe they really don't accept you for who you are, or that you just don't see eye to eye on some things. Then that's okay too, to kind of focus in on kind of the things that align more with you.
Uh, um, and to go off what you had just said and thinking about the book itself, I think one of the major themes throughout the book, and especially right now in our lives as the pandemic rages on, is we're all in some way, shape, form, or fashion kind of combating with loneliness. We see that in the book with Aristotle's father, who is a Vietnam War veteran. We see that with Aristotle in the character of Dante, who are both coming to terms with their sexuality during the late 80s. So what do you think is the best way that we can kind of face loneliness head on? How can we combat loneliness?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm so glad we're kind of starting off there. As you were saying, Jacob, it's something that's so pervasive and prevalent, right? It impacts all of us. Doesn't matter our background, our age, or our walks of life. Like we can all experience potentially loneliness. And just coincidentally, I saw someone sharing a poem by Maya Angelou recently about alone, alone, all alone, nobody can make it out here alone. And I think that really speaks to us as humans, our social nature, to feel and desire and need a sense of connection, a sense of companionship, and even just a sense of community. So I think that's really important for us to be able to figure out, how do we foster that? How do we work so that we don't feel that loneliness? Quick kind of disclaimer, this is not to say that, needing alone time is a bad thing. I think those are actually good. Sometimes we need it for our self-care. But it is about kind of the difference between like kind of pervasive, not lacking in the connection and that longing for connection, I think is what we define as loneliness. And so, I'm thinking a little bit about like, how do we combat loneliness? I think kind of our mindset kind of seeing it as like, this is something that's a work in progress. It takes effort. It might not happen overnight. It probably wouldn't happen overnight. Just like with our physical health, I do a lot of parallels with our physical health. Think about physical health, right? You exercise once, it doesn't mean you have to kind of work at it, right? Similarly, in terms of these kinds of things, right? Like reaching out to someone might feel uncomfortable to start, or like even people who do like dating, right? It's kind of uncomfortable to start. But if like I wish I had like a relationship where I could be comfortably in silence with someone on the couch, that takes time, right? It takes time to go through some of that awkwardness. So recognizing that, accepting some of that, and it's also those little steps to kind of push ourselves outside of our comfort zone. I think we happen to work with a lot of folks who have social anxiety. So they're always worried, like, oh my goodness, I can't ask anyone. They're gonna like think I'm so awkward or whatever. It's like, oh, they're like, why are you reaching out to me? But if you flip the script, I always ask them like, well, what if that person reached out to you, or they randomly texted you or whatever, started talking to you? Oftentimes people are like, oh yeah, that'd be great, right? I think that's what we want. We want people to reach out to us. But it is interesting, right? Like we tell ourselves, like, what if you flip that script? You're like, okay, well then if that person, if they reached out to me, I would be like it, then why not be the one that initiates? Why not be the one that kind of reaches out and see what happens from there? And then I think another thought that brought to mind that you mentioned, Jacob, is this pandemic has really, shown how important social connection is. So I think that's also important to add, and thinking about loneliness, it's not always about, it is important to have long lasting and really deep, rich relationships, but it's also about any kind of social connection, right? Hearing people who, I worked with pre-pandemic who love their jobs. So then as we got into the pandemic, being like, why do I feel like so burnt out? And I think it's those kind of like subtle nuances that we don't recognize that are so important to us. Like, like being able to like walk around the office, happen to have a casual conversation with somebody about their day that isn't specific to work related. People who are essential workers who work at the grocery store stocking shelves and used to people yelling at them like, why isn't this in stock? They're saying like, you know, means so much to me when people just say, thank you so much. I appreciate the hard work you're doing, you know? So these are all like little things that I think can enrich kind of our social connection.
Absolutely. And it is so funny. Just yesterday, I was thinking to myself, I really miss small talking with patrons.
Yeah.
You know, how was your day? Oh, I love this book. Let's get this book's due back on the 31st. Just having those small kind of conversations with people, it is amazing how much that that combated my own sense of loneliness that I'm feeling during the pandemic. Um, so yeah, before we move on, Scott, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah. I think, you know, you sort of highlighted a point that I think a lot of us can resonate, especially especially right now. I think sometimes loneliness can snowball, and even what you're talking about there with a small interaction feels big. I think it feels big in a good way, where, hey, this is sort of like a glass of water in the desert. Right, even now a small interaction can fill our cup up a little bit, so to speak. But it also it can be big in a bad way, where we sort of feel like, hey, I'm rusty, or what used to come easily seems really huge to me. And I think that, right, we can almost become more and more alienated from our community and the people around us, and see the barriers as huge obstacles. Now, you know, interactions we might not think about, like going to the grocery store, or you know, talking to somebody at work or around the water cooler or anything like that, now seems big and almost can seem unapproachable. And I think that one thing that is tough about that is it can sort of mean that in the time we need it the most, it's also the hardest to go reach out for it, right? And so sometimes, right, maybe it helps us to keep that in mind if we think, hey, maybe the person across from me needs it the most right now, and so I can lend a hand by just saying hi or giving them a smile. Or if it's our own friends, family, community member that we know is struggling, sometimes it can be hard not to think, well, it's so simple. Just go out and say hi to somebody, or join us, you know, social group, although that's not easy now. But recognizing and validating for ourselves and others that the more lonely we get, the more separated from people we get, we might know that that's exactly what we need, is that connection, but it becomes a lot harder to bring ourselves there. And so trying to just give that space and accommodate people if we can, and validate them. Yeah, that's all.
Wow. And sometimes I think that loneliness plays into, or rather, self-esteem plays into the loneliness that we feel. And this particular book is definitely about how does one gain or maintain positive self-esteem. We see that our characters struggle with that throughout the book. So what do you guys think are the best ways to either gain or maintain a positive sense of self-esteem? Yeah.
Yeah, that's such another great question, because again, I feel like it's something that impacts all of us, right? We hear that so much from the time when they're young to even as an adult. And it's a great segue, because in thinking about what we were just talking about, you know, our need for connection, I think there's also a sense of like how other people see us sometimes can dictate how we see ourselves. So one thing that I often like to tell folks is, you know, it's not about what other people or other people's opinions of you are. It's about what you see yourself as, or how you want to see yourself as. You know, again, easier said than done, but just kind of bringing back to that core of like, you know, what do I want to be about? You know, how do I want other people to see me as? And then another piece that I share kind of in other contexts too, not even just self-esteem, you know, when we talk about a certain therapy called cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, we talk about our thoughts and how that can shape how we feel and how we act. So sometimes I'll tell people like thoughts aren't facts. So how do we remind ourselves that our thoughts are not facts. So again, back to people who maybe have like say social anxiety or anything, or maybe low self-worth, right? Low self-esteem, maybe it feels like, oh, I'm boring, people think I'm not interesting, I'm not worthwhile, whatever it could be, right? But recognizing that those aren't true, right? Where are the facts in that? So that's one thing. I don't know, Scott, you wanted to add some more things around self-esteem?
Yeah, I mean, right. It can be tricky. And I think, right, this is actually even a concept we've been talking about a little bit at work. It is being compassionate towards yourself. And I think that can be hard. And so even if that's not something you can access, trying to surround yourself with people who are supportive, trying to sort of lean into those situations. And then also, right, similar with a vibe I gave when we were talking about loneliness, is sometimes self-esteem can start with trying to right, fill other people up. So right, shining our light, our attention on the positive qualities of others can start a reciprocal interaction that ends up making us feel good, right? I mean, it feels good to be good to other people and to see that, hey, I have this impact on other people, even if, it doesn't have to be the deepest thing, but that can even help jumpstart some good feelings and jumpstart some of that, positivity, and even just right, a sense of self-efficacy of, hey, I might not be a perfect person, but I can make people around me feel good, can be a start. So doing things like that, building a sense of efficacy is good in that way, but also we can do it through more concrete, sort of hobbies or crafts or things of that nature. I think personally, it's sort of a human need to see growth or development in an area. So that's another good way to build self-esteem, is if you can engage in any activity, whether it's right, a craft like painting or pottery or woodworking or something like that, or even a martial art is another good example, or some type of exercise, something where you can see yourself growing, and it sort of becomes this undeniable sense of worth or at least growth, that, hey, I can't deny that, on week 1 I could lift 10 pounds, and on week 20 I can lift 50 pounds. This sort of then it can help fight back against some of the difficult processes that go in our head when it sort of just becomes a base fact that we're growing and changing and improving in areas that we set ourselves out to. So I think that's a good one. And then even going back to trying to sort of build a sense of positivity can be gratitude, right? It's oftentimes difficult, but finding ways that we can draw our attention to what's working well for us, or the things that we do have that we appreciate, can start to fill our mind and our days and our time with more positive thoughts, which can sort of help to squeeze out, to a certain extent, some negative thoughts. So yeah.
Yes, and to speak to that, it might sound a little funny, but during the pandemic, I've gotten really into jigsaw puzzles, and I've started, I started at 500-piece jigsaw puzzles, and I sat down and I go, you cannot do this. You cannot do this. There is no way. And then as I became a better, puzzler, I started doing 1,000-piece puzzles and puzzles that don't have a picture for you to go off of. And I was doing a puzzle a few days ago, and I just kind of thought to myself, like, wow, this thing that you said you could not do, you are doing right now, and you're doing it kind of good.
That's
And I was like,
awesome.
that's a wonderful feeling.
Yeah,
And it's funny,
exactly.
yeah, it's funny to talk about jigsaw puzzles like that, but like it did something for me. So
Well, I
And it's
love
a
that
foot,
example.
yeah, it's a foothold,
yeah,
in a certain sense. Sorry though, go ahead, Jennifer.
Oh, no, I was just saying that's awesome, Jacob. I appreciate the like lived out example of kind of seeing how that can unfold, right? In the beginning, it's kind of like daunting. You're probably like, I've never really done puzzles before. And to now be like, to have you tell me, because I'm not a puzzler, to be like, I'm doing it without even like what the finished product looks like, seems impossible, but obviously
Yes.
possible. So, and it sounds, and just looking at your expression and how excited it makes you really shows how much it can really positively affect us. So that's awesome. I appreciate you adding that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I have a
It
quick.
just makes me giggle. Everyone, me and my friends, we're all of a sudden, we're like 28-year-old puzzle fanatics. And it's just like, how did we get here? But yes, sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, no worries. My screen froze for a second, but I just wanted to add a quick note. Something that Scott had mentioned made me think about, yeah, we were coincidentally just happened to be watching a TED talk, you know, it was kind of comparing kind of self-esteem and self-compassion, which I thought was very timely. So I just wanted to kind of add that piece. I know Scott mentioned self-compassion, and I thought it was really great and important to kind of recognize, because oftentimes we think about self-esteem, it's often kind of related to a sense of accomplishment of having done something or in comparison to somebody else, and so the concept of like self-compassion is kind of recognizing that we all are inherently worthy, right? Like we haven't done anything to earn it, but we have this inherent worth. And I really like that idea. And then someone shared an analogy I thought was powerful, like kind of imagining like if a kid came across you, you were kind of like sitting around somewhere and you saw a kid before your eyes kind of fall off their bike, and what do you do when you go run towards that kid is kind of how we should treat ourselves with compassion.
Self-compassion, inherent self-worth. I think those are very meaningful phrases and ideas for this time in the world. Now, to switch gears a little bit, in the book and in many cultures, particularly the very stuffy Catholic Midwestern background that I come from as well, seeking mental health treatment is not so, it's just something that you do not do. It is deeply stigmatized. And we see that in the book as well. I wanted to ask you guys, have you seen this play out in your practice? And how do we kind of destigmatize asking for help? A big question, but.
Oh yeah, I mean, right. I think as you could guess, absolutely, right. You see this play out in a lot of different ways, whether it's the stigma that might stop somebody from approaching services to begin with, or back out after it gets, tough, right, to the stigma that leads people to not want to share the fact that they're in treatment, or to talk about, their difficulties with other people, right. I think it harks back a little bit to the loneliness conversation here, where this stigma can, right, you see it make people feel alone in having mental difficulties, right, and having these sort of life challenges. It can feel like, especially right with social media, that everything's perfect for everybody else but me. Right, I must be crazy if I'm thinking these tough thoughts. And I think, right, we're seeing a trend where it's getting better, right? We're seeing some stigma reduction going on. And I think the key thrust here is to normalize it, right? To say, hey, and this can come from people who are in a position of absolute power or relative power, right? Like, whether it's a pop star or your boss at work or just your parent saying, hey, I'm in therapy and ooh, this thing was tough for me, or this has really helped me, and speak positively about the experience and try to sort of shed some of that shame of the experience, I think can be really important. And so even if it's just, open, if you're comfortable, right, because privacy is key, but if you're comfortable sharing with somebody that you care about, hey, maybe you want to try this because I tried it and it really helped, or trying to say, hey, everybody needs somebody to talk to every once in a while, and trying to in these ways spread that support. I think there's also a sense of distrust that can exist too, and that type of stigma can be present here that I've seen. And I think it's hard to overcome that, right? Hey, is this person going to use this against me or reveal it to people that I know, or is it somehow going to come back, to hurt me that I'm opening myself up, right? And so in that way, it's tough, right, to be vulnerable. And so the more we can normalize it and support people, then, hey, it doesn't matter if, you found out that I have received, treatment before, or that, I received a certain diagnosis, because, hey, to a certain extent, everybody goes through it at some point, whether it's, some specific diagnosis, or, actually seeking treatment, or just everybody goes through mental difficulties, right? And that's kind of what I would say. It's a tough battle, but the more we can sort of make it just a thing people do, instead of having this sort of cloud of mystery and all that around it, I think helps.
What you're saying is to demystify mental health help is to destigmatize mental health help.
Yeah,
Oh,
honestly,
I
in a
hear
certain
you.
way, yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
I think to add to that too, something that I've noticed is also, and this speaks to more of a systemic issue, but representation can really make a difference too. I think sometimes people see it as like, oh, well, that's like a white person thing or a person issue, or maybe an upper middle class thing, but to be able to see like I see someone else who's okay, here's another Asian that's also a therapist. People feel like they feel, even just from that, they feel more seen and understood. And also being more access to care. Maybe people feel like I didn't realize I could use my health benefit insurance to be able to work with someone. So I think there's that piece of it. I also see it as kind of I phrase it as more of like a strength-based perspective. Like someone who goes to the gym and wants to work with a physical trainer. It's not about like there's something wrong with you, there's a deficit, but there's more of like a strength-based, like here I am, I want to work at something. There's something I'm striving towards. Either I want to overcome something that's going on in my life, or in spite of that, how do I pursue kind of a life that I feel like is more meaningful and more enriching, is the way I like to look at it. I once had a client say like, I see it as part of like my overall healthcare. I take my vitamins, I exercise 3 times a week, and I go to therapy, so seeing it as like overall wellness piece to it, I think has been important too. And yeah, the destigmatizing I think is important. There's a little cartoon graphic that I've seen circulating around, and sometimes I'll share with clients who are either struggling with that or struggling with some family member who doesn't quite get it. It kind of has people going through these physical ailments, whether someone's in the hospital bed with like an IV hooked up to them, or their like hand is like, there's something bleeding. And then people around them in the cartoon are saying like, well, it's all about how you're looking at it. Why can't you just try harder? Things that we say to people when it comes to them working on their mental health. So it's like, why is it that we treat like someone who's wanting to work on mental health differently than we treat someone who's wanting to work on their physical health?
Yes. And I am very happy and proud to say that I'm somebody who is therapized. I go to the therapy, and I was talking with my grandpa, and really the conversation was like, you should go to therapy. But I had brought up that I was in therapy myself, and he kind of looked at me and he was like, well, what are they going to do for you can't do for yourself? And I went, ooh. There's a little bit of a toxic masculinity vibe to that. Like I'm a man, like I can figure this out myself. Why wouldn't I be able to? And we see that toxic masculinity in the book as well. Now I feel like the term toxic masculinity is maybe not controversial, but it definitely is evocative, right? So when we're talking about this thing, what do I mean? What exactly is toxic masculinity?
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump right into it. I think, right, anything taken too far of an extreme can become a bad thing, right? And so even just running with your example that you used right there about, right, hey, I am self-reliant, right? That's sort of the positive way to frame it. I'm self-reliant. I don't need help. What can they do that you can't do for yourself? Well, first, they can be a different person other than you to talk to. It's sometimes hard to talk to a wall and get everything done. But more seriously talking, right? It's any aspect here where we take these extreme pressures of what it means to be masculine or what it means to be a male and amplify it and sort of take these as the absolute rules to live by, right? We see it in I'm self-reliant, I'm tough, I can't ask for help. And where it gets tricky is okay, so does that mean if I need to ask for help, all of a sudden my identity is invalidated? Right. And this can be where we're sort of pulling ourselves apart here, right? Where it's, hey, I another thing is, right, sort of masculine is the opposite of feminine. So I can't embody any of the aspects that we might typically think as feminine, right? Like if right, sensitivity or caring for others or showing your emotions or affection, right? Okay, if I do any of those things, that means I undermine my entire identity. And it can be these sort of like catch 22s, because I some of those things we all need to do at some point in our lives, right? I think that showing your appreciation and showing your emotions can be a really positive experience. Having, right, and even beyond those sort of bigger, broader ideas is even just like, can I not like the color pink? Can I not have, a flower in my shirt or in my hair, even because I also believe that I possess this masculine identity? And in this way, we find we take things away from ourselves that may in fact be exactly what we need. We take away our own options, because if we engage in any of those actions or thoughts or beliefs, then that means we're not who we thought we were. Whoever I claim to be must be fake, or I must be weak in some sense, right? Because I'm not able to live up to all of these expectations. And I think it's where even, right, the first line of the book, um, sort of referencing, the problem with my life was that it was someone else's idea, right? It's we're living up to somebody else's standard, and it is our own, sort of conceptualization. Everybody has an individual notion of what it means to be masculine or feminine, but a lot of that is formed by, the society around us and these other factors we talked about earlier. And it's it can be tough.
And what you said directly, I'd like to take this space to make a direct connection to the book. So for those of you who might not have read it, it really is a story. It's the late 80s. It's El Paso, Texas, right on the border. And it's about two 15-year-old Mexican-American boys. It really is about their friendship. And within that friendship, it's about coming to terms with their sexualities. Now, one of the characters, Dante, is really cool with who he is, and I wouldn't say that toxic masculinity really plays into his life. As much as I hate the word flamboyant, this person is flamboyant, and does what he wants. He does what he wants when he wants, and in the way that he talks, he speaks the way he would like to speak. Now, the other character, Aristotle, is deeply attracted to that about him, but in that same breath, it also kind of grosses him out. He's like, how can somebody be so open and so not a man? And then why do I dig it so much? Like he's very much gravitating to Dante's Dante is somebody who has good self-esteem. And Aristotle is attracted to that. So I just kind of wanted to say that a little bit, because what you were saying, we see that play out in the book almost word for word. So yes, I think it's also important. Can we talk a little bit about how, like, concrete examples of how we see toxic masculinity play out in the world around us for people who might not be, who this might be their first time interacting with that terminology?
Yeah, I can go ahead and run with it. I think, right, we even went into one with the brief story about your grandfather, but I think it can be right, an example might be that, hey, I'm not allowed to cry, or boys shouldn't cry, or this idea of, you've got to man up, right? And it might be that I have some internal need to express myself, but because I can't cry, or because I can't share my emotions, maybe that doesn't come out at all, right? And I never have an outlet for that, and that builds whatever you want to call it, but stress is sort of the broadest term for it, right? It builds a sense of stress. It builds, right, some self-criticism in your mind, or maybe it does come out, but it comes out sideways, so to speak, right? Where, hey, I'm not allowed to cry. So what's acceptable? You run through the list of sort of typically acceptable male emotions, and a lot of times you end up at anger, right? And so a lot of times it means we suppress worries, anxieties, all of these feelings that we're not supposed to show, sadness, and instead we act out in the one way that is sort of dominant and aggressive, as a man should be, or a masculine person should be, and that's through anger, right? Which oftentimes is not going to get your needs met, right? I mean, sometimes it can be cathartic, sure, but it's not often gonna do the job you need it to do.
Yeah, and I think it speaks to like not only does toxic masculinity then impact the individual, right? But then how does that can impact those around us, and then also systemically, right? Because you're saying like the anger is being acted out, or for those around them feeling like gaslighted or not feeling heard in a way, because we're not allowed to express emotions either way type thing. So I think it speaks to kind of how it not only impacts that individual, but yeah, others around them, and so I think you spoke on this already, Scott, but talking about all of this and how speaking about stigma, right? The stigma about men are enculturated to not feel like they're able to talk about their emotions or be vulnerable or all of that. Like that leads to kind of why it's the term toxic. Is there anything that we can kind of do as a culture or whatnot to kind of reclaim masculinity? Is there like a positive masculinity? What does that look like?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think these notions, they can be positive, and it can be right source for power, right? It's right, if we pivot them or reframe them in a positive way, it can be good. Maybe, right, this sort of strength that we masculine strength that you're supposed to project can be the strength to be vulnerable, right? Maybe it can, that self-reliance, or sort of not caring what other people think, could be, hey, I don't care what your judgment is about my mental health, and I'm proud enough to own it, and I'm strong enough to deal with the criticism that's going to come from it, right? I think oftentimes masculinity is tied to you have to be a provider, which can be tough if you're not able to provide, but maybe it means you provide in a different way. I'm going to provide for the emotional security of the people I care about. I'm going to I'm going to bring my own challenges to the table, because that provides the people around me with a way to examine these thoughts and these challenges, and gain from that, right? And I think in this way, it's about using those strengths in a positive way, and being aware to not sort of let the limitations curtail your actions in a way that hurts other people, right? We don't want to, right. There's a sort of alpha dominance aspect there, and instead of saying, hey, I'm going to use this to sort of put down the people around me, maybe that sort of attitude is instead embodied by, I'm going to open myself up, and as a person in a position of power, recognize that there's something to gain from me expressing my emotions, because in this way, right, I show I'm not caring that people might judge me poorly because I have emotions, or because I have insecurities, or because I deal with challenges, right?
Yes.
So yeah, it's a tough spot, but yeah.
You're saying that in fact the manly thing to do might be actually to be honest about our emotions. Oh. um so a lot of what we've been talking about, and a lot about what the book is about, is living up to expectations. As I mentioned, this is a book about Mexican American identity, and the characters are Mexican American. And Dante, who does not speak Spanish, his family um, are not directly from Mexico. It would be his grandparents, if I remember correctly. He feels as though he will never be Mexican enough. He feels as if he'll never be straight enough. He'll never be manly enough. So what would you say to somebody who was feeling that way, that they won't be blank enough? People who are feeling as though they're not fitting into society's expectations for them. What advice would you have?
Yeah, this is such a good question because I feel like it comes up a lot in the work that we do. You know, we see a lot of folks come to Everwell related to some aspect related to kind of culture, identity, and that kind of thing. And so I appreciate, Jacob, you kind of expanding that a bit, because that's kind of what came to mind first too. It's just like, you know, people who are you know, second or more generation American, right? Like their parents were the ones that immigrated, or some generation above has immigrated here. So or someone who's bi or multicultural, or transracially adopted, or other kinds of things where they're just feeling like I'm not enough. And I guess on the flip of that, I haven't even recently talking to someone not feeling kind of American enough. You know, it's like, oh, people have told them like your name is too Asian, or you speak English with an accent, or those kinds of things. And so they're like, am I American enough? So I hear this in kind of all these different kinds of ways, you know. And I think it kind of goes back to, again, easier said than done, but that concept of feeling like, what is it that we want to be about? You know, I know that we often are shaped by kind of what other people might say to us or their concept of us, but kind of what is it about us, you know, because when it comes to kind of any kind of cultural identity, not just ethnic identity, right? There is no, it's not a comparison game, right? Like, am I more Chinese than this person over there? There's no litmus test, right? So kind of thinking about like, what does it mean to me? And what do I want to do about it, right? And rather than seeing it as something that's like a deficit, you know, seeing it as like, what can I do with that? You know, I've seen this kind of come out with some folks who are, say, transracially adopted from Korea, you know, and especially like last year and hopefully continuing this year, the Stop Asian Hate movement, right? There was kind of an imposter syndrome of like, well, am I Asian enough to be like participating in this, you know, or those kinds of things. But it's like, hey, if this is something that you're passionate about, or you feel like this is important to you, why not lean into that, you know? Or someone who's, again, speaking about someone who was adopted into a white family, right? But they're like, I don't know anything about my Korean heritage, and I might not feel Korean enough, but then deciding to lean into that and say like, you know what, the power now with it not being just what's in our geographical region, right? Like being able to find kind of online groups of other adoptee communities, or there's conferences, or being able to be like, I want to learn more about maybe the culinary aspect of my heritage or the language as just a starting point. I know that's just the tip of the iceberg, but yeah, I kind of leaning into that and not just making it about kind of like, you know, what am I missing, but what do I want to do about it? You know, I again kind of bring it back to the core. Obviously in therapy it might be different, right? If someone comes up, you know, as I kind of start sharing, like, I don't feel Mexican enough, we probably want to explore a little bit what that looks like. But then basically what we're talking about here would be how do we kind of help empower them basically to kind of explore what does that mean for them? What do they want, you know?
And I think that for people who have read the book, and for people who have yet to read the book, and for people who haven't read the book, I just think that it's an important thing to consider, especially as and I've said it a million times, and I need to think of better ways to say it, especially as we're examining the world that we're living in today. It's kind of a wild time. It's a pretty wild time. So yes, the novel's, as I've mentioned before, is about two young people who are coming to terms with who they are. It is a coming of age story, and a part of their coming of age is coming to terms with their sexual identities. So I wanted to hear from you guys. What advice do you have for queer young people who feel as though they're in a place where they're ready to come out to their friends and family? What support can we offer them, and what information can we share with them now that you think would be helpful?
Yeah, and so here I'm actually going to start even a step before that, right? And by saying, obviously, right, this is a hugely individual process. Even the notion of coming out is an individual process. And so there is a right time for people, and some people it's going to be never. And I think a huge part of this is validating that every aspect is okay, right? If you aren't ready to come out, that's okay. If you don't know when you're ready to come out, that's okay. If you do want to come out, excellent, right? And I think in this way is a super individual process. You have to sort of feel out what's comfortable for you, which can be hard in itself, right? Because there's a lot of pressures. I should come out, right? Because X, Y, and Z, right? Or I shouldn't come out because there might be backlash from certain people. So always it's a hard process, even if you do know what you want, right? It can still be a very difficult process. And so I think my biggest advice is, right, find a support person or support people if you can, right? If that's a best friend, if that's online support group, if that's even none of the above, and maybe could be someone who is in the mental health professional or a school counselor or somebody that makes you feel comfortable, because it is a difficult load to bear on your own, right? And so that would sort of be a point of advice, if I can be so bold as to give advice, right, is to find a supportive person or supportive people. I think right there's a lot to be said there. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. And then really not feeling like there's any right way to do it and right way that you have to do it, and that it's I just want to validate, I guess, that it is okay to feel like there's a lot of risk involved. There is a lot of risk realistically, right? And just to validate that it's a hard process to go through. So yeah, those are my thoughts. I guess for right now, I sort of collect it and maybe say something in a second.
Absolutely. And what you have just said reminds me of one day I was watching the Ellen DeGeneres show, and she played this video of these two twins who very emotionally come out to their parents. It's a very emotional video. People are crying. There's hugs. There's happiness. And then she presents the twins with like a $10,000 check. And I'm like, oh man, perhaps this is not the message that we'd like to send to queer youth who are watching this right now. And there's so many people who are watching the Ellen DeGeneres show, because it says, come out and you'll be rewarded. And that isn't always the case. It might be the case. I was just like, man, this is some mixed messaging going on here. Here's 10K. Here's 10K. Jeez Louise. On the flip side of this question, I would also like to know what advice you have for parents. Let's say that their child has come out to them. What would you like to share with parents who are going through that experience?
I think I guess if I could jump in, I guess, most importantly, I know, it sounds so broad, but really it also seems simple, but also hard, right? Just be able to be understanding, be supportive, help them feel seen and accepted and loved, right? I think that a question that sometimes I hear from parents are like, well, how do I know my kid is not too young, right, to really know that they're queer, right? And they're kind of in their minds like, how do I try to convince them otherwise, right? But I think what's important is to be like wholeheartedly accept them for who they are right now. If they decide to change, wholeheartedly accept them for who they are then too. I think to kind of link it back to what we were talking about even at the beginning of this talk, right? When we're talking about mental health and mental well-being, right? And as humans, right, our desire, our longing is to feel understood, right? We're talking about feeling understood, supported, to be able to be accepted for our authentic selves, right? And I think very much that nature then too plays out too as a parent, like in order to support our kid, help them feel supported, because it's daunting, it's scary, one probably even just coming out to their own parent is probably scary because they don't know, how their parent will react. But also too, even beyond that, it's like, okay, what am I going to do going about the world with my peers, with classmates, all of that. So to be able to have yourself to show that you want to be a source of support for them is important. And I think what would be important to kind of distinguish is that if there are things that you can educate yourself on through readings, through your own support groups, whatever, that's important to do, because you don't want to have the kid be the one educating you on more, broader concepts, right? I think it's important, like, you want to be there and meet your kids' needs and talk to them and better understand their specific lived experience, but also not feel like asking them, well, like, okay, well, tell me about XYZ related to anything related to general LGBTQ type things, so I think that's also important. I don't know if Scott had something else he wanted to add.
Yeah, I actually just want to piggyback on basically, what you're saying, that I really agree with, is validation is number one, 100%. I think it's important also for parents to differentiate. Validation does not have to mean agreement. It doesn't have to mean this is your favorite thing that has ever happened. What it does mean is that you see them, you see your child, you support your child, you love your child, you accept your child. Also, acceptance does not mean that you have to agree with. There's a lot of things we accept about the world that aren't our favorite thing. But it really, it's not about the parent, right? In a very real sense, it's about the individual. And even if I can bridge back to the conversation before, because I thought another piece of advice, the person you have to come out to first does not need to be your parents. You do not owe that to your parents. And then as a parent, if they come out to you first or at all, what a blessing, right? This is somebody saying, I trust you enough to be completely vulnerable and open to you, right? And that should only be seen as a blessing, because believe me, it is entirely possible for this person to not tell you a thing, wait till they're 18 and disappear off, the face of your radar, right? And so it is an absolute blessing. And so it may be extremely difficult to do so, but take it as such would be my advice. And then, just doubling down on recognize the same thing, right? That I said, for the young person is find your supports. I would say for, the adult, hey, if they came out to the friend first, awesome. That means they have a good support, right? And then if they feel like they don't have supports, help them find those supports, because they are tricky. They're not a given, and we all need supports, especially a young person, going through the process of coming out if they choose to do so, or if they choose not to, supporting them through that as well, right? And then advocate as much as you can, right? You're, as an adult, you're in a position of relative power, and advocating can show that you care, show that you take your child seriously, and show them exactly what I'm sure is true, that you're willing to fight for them. So yeah, that's why I would say, right, try as much to set any resentments aside and just open yourself up to that relationship. Yeah.
And to put what you guys have said to a real life example, I am very lucky that my family has been so supportive about me being gay, me being a part of the LGBTQ community, so on and so forth. And I remember when I came out to my mother, she didn't really express comfort or discomfort. What she did is she went to the library and she came home with a stack of books that were like, my kid is gay, I have a gay child. Children that I have that are gay, I have a gay child. Those books. And I watched her read them. And then she came up to me and she said, okay, I understand now. Okay, yeah, I'm cool. This all makes sense. And first of all, let me say how lucky I am to have that experience. But also it taught me this life lesson of, like, in any interaction, any given interaction, I probably could use to know more before I voice my opinion. It would probably suit me well if I learned more about what the person was talking about. And that is something that is on me. I have an ability to educate myself before I start running my mouth and potentially causing damage to other people. So yeah, shout out to my mom and all that wonderful stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And validation keeps that door open to come back to the conversation.
Yes.
when you've had the chance to think about it, to do some research, if you want to do some research, validation keeps that door open, keeps that relationship open, right? Because nobody wants to have a relationship with somebody that thinks that they are not a valid person, or it at least becomes that much tougher.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'd add too, how powerful it must have been for you, Jacob, to see your mother, wanting to kind of read up and
Yes.
better understand, right? I think that's powerful too, right? Like sometimes we feel intimidated, like I don't know anything about this, but I was like, actually, that's even more meaningful to be like, okay, maybe I don't know anyone in my personal spheres of influence that is part of the LGBTQ community, and now my kid or loved one is that, but this is important. This is someone I care about. I want to be able to better understand so that I can better support them, and that's so powerful.
Yes. And what she said was she there was a lot for her to learn, but there was much more she had to unlearn.
That's right. That's right.
And I
Yes.
was like, whoa, that's pretty crazy. And also, I think children notice everything.
Oh, yeah.
And she didn't know she was doing it, but what she was doing was she was modeling for me how to do this sort of thing in my everyday life. I'm not sure she knew that, but what I learned from that is, in a situation like this is what you do. This is how you act, and this is how you speak. So yeah, no, very grateful, very lucky. Um, but it's definitely something that we have to talk about as a community.
Mhm.
So yes, before we wrap up, any last thoughts, feelings before we wrap up? What are we thinking?
This is given the chance now, I'll sort of just reiterate my last point, which I believe sort of applies to all the points, right? In terms of what can we do to help people through any type of life challenge, mental health challenge. And the number one thing is saying, hey, even if I don't understand what you're going through or what you're saying, I understand that you're somebody going through the human condition right now, and I'm here for you. What can I do? How can I be present with you? Is sort of the most important thing, right? And stepping outside of any sort of automatic judgment you might have, or anything like that, to just look at the most important fact, which is, this is somebody across from me that is another human being that needs connection, needs belonging. And how we get there is through just saying, hey, validation, right? You're absolutely, what you're going through is real. What you're going through is important. And if it's important to you, it's important to me. And if there's anything I can do, I'm here with you. And that's sort of like broadly across all the different topics we talked
Yes,
about, right? But yeah, that's, I guess, my 2
absolutely.
cents.
Yeah, I love that summary, and I don't think I have anything very succinct to wrap up in, but I just thought it was interesting as we were kind of having this dialogue, so much, and thinking about mental health, mental well-being. It's about so much about like ourselves, how we see ourselves, but it's also about the kind of the interpersonal connection, right? So much of these questions are shaped by our relationships with each other. And so how do we go about our relationships, or seeking out relationships in ways in which we can be able to show and be our authentic selves, that we can show understanding for each other and feel understood and supported. So I thought that was interesting just to see that theme kind of play out.
Yes. Well, I want to thank you guys so much for offering your expertise and taking the time to have this conversation with us here at the library. Thank you, Jennifer Tang, Scott Kennedy of Everwell Health and Counseling Services. For those of you who would like to check out more about the Big Gay Read, again, it's called Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe. Well, bam! There it is right there. Look at all those medals on that book.
I know, right? I was like, oh, they're not stickers.
Cover. By Benjamine Alire Saenz. The library has many copies. Come and get your copy today. And be sure to check out aadl.org/thebiggayread to see what other content we've created surrounding the book. Now, we do hope we are living Covida Loca, but we're hoping that by in these coming months, we'll be actually able to speak with the author himself. So in the meanwhile, check out what we got online. And yeah, I just want to say thank you guys again.
Yeah, thanks for having us. It was really nice to talk to you today.
Yeah,
The
thank you.
feeling is mutual.